All right. Oh, oh, okay. All right. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first episode of I'm gonna call it Castle Mondays because we're talking about castles, and I'm gonna try to keep posting them on Mondays. This show is hosted by me, Doctor Idiot. I say that because I'm not a historian. Okay, this is actually really my first time seriously engaging with the history of Wales, the history of England, but I want to get better at drawing castles. So I've decided I'm going to draw a bunch of castles, and I thought it would be fun in the process of watching me draw these castles to talk about some history in reference to the castles, Tell everybody some stories about what's going on with these things. So, this is our first episode. This is about the Cardiff Castle in Cardiff, Wales. This is going to be the first part. I'm actually going to probably draw different sections of the property because today I think the part we're focusing on is the keep. I'm still not totally up to speed with castle anatomy. So right now, this is the keep of Cardiff, as far as I'm aware. And the only reason that I want to really split this up into multiple videos, and I'll probably draw different parts of Cardiff Castle, is because the history is really involved. Believe it or not, there's a lot of history to this place. So we're going to try to appreciate it as much as we can and as deeply as we can, because I don't want to leave any of it really out. I think it's really interesting so far what I've got. So I guess let's begin with the first part of the history being Roman rule in around the 50 AD. Romans came to southern Wales, the Cardiff site that we know today, in, we suspect, about 50 AD, in order to subdue a local tribe known as the Silurs, who were a confederation of tribes in the area in Wales, in what we know as Wales now. Yeah, and this site in particular was made into a Roman military fort in order to kind of control the three rivers that connect right here. That's one of the more valuable sort of parts of the Cardiff Castle site, and why it's such an important kind of hold for various powers throughout this timeline, is that it sits at the intersection of three rivers. Let's see. I know I have these rivers listed somewhere. I believe one is the Taff. One is the Taff River. All right, let's see. Can I find the other two? So there's the Taff River. And no, I can't find the other two. I'll write them on screen because I can't find them right now. Just so you all know, this is you're all just hearing a voiceover. I'm just sitting in front of my desk with a loose collection of notes. So this is really we're gonna see how this goes. But yeah, originally this was a Roman military fort settlement used to try to subdue the local tribe, the Silurs, who were part of a kind of confederation, probably governed by a warrior aristocracy that, upon Rome's landing in Wales, it seems developed some level of trade with the Romans. This would likely be somewhat dependent on the existing relationship that the Silurs actually had with more independent farmsteads, which they coexisted with somewhat peacefully. And this all kind of, this sort of like peaceful, okay, kitty, we don't have to get on the computer. All right, guys. I'm fighting my cat tooth and nail to make this video. Let that be known. My cat is rebelling. She does not want you to hear about history. So the first attack, the Romans' attack against the Silures, happened in 48 AD, and this is when there's two kind of Welsh, I guess what we'll consider Welsh tribes in the area at that time, known as, one was the Silures and the other one were the Ordevices. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm writing all this on screen though. They were actually led together by a leader known as Caratakis, who was ultimately defeated in 51 AD by Roman general Astorius. But even with the defeat of this leader, that didn't stop the Silures and likely the other tribe from doing guerrilla warfare to try and defend their land and their people against Roman rule. This, however, was eventually kind of settled in 75 AD, where it was reported that the Silures were subdued, according to Roman sources. So I'm not certain. I wasn't able to find in my research if this was as a result of a military defeat or some kind of peaceful arrangement between the two. But yeah, that struggle and that conflict marks the reason why Rome really was interested in the site of Cardiff Castle to begin with, and how, this establishes the need for a sort of military fort that will go on to really inform the foundation and further constructions to be had on the site. These forts, they left a lot of material, and they were just generally a more fortified position necessarily, not to mention this fort in particular, again, was at the intersection of three rivers and had a very significant port, allowing it to get materials in and out of from Rome, or in the future from somewhere in England. So that kind of establishes how we got here, why this fort is even being sort of established and everything like that. So by 75 AD, the Silures and the Ordovices, all these like Welsh kind of natives, it seems, largely accept Roman rule from the looks of it, more or less. Again, I'm not a historian, and maybe at some point I'll be able to go into this a little bit more in depth, so don't hold me to my words here, and I highly recommend that you take anything I say and research it yourself if you're curious. But for the most part, it seems that the Romans are able to subdue the Silures by 75 AD and are now, just kind of using England and Wales, this whole island, as like sort of a colonial project. And this kind of lasts until around the 3rd century. During the 3rd century crisis, Rome ends up recalling a bunch of soldiers and military leaders to try to defend the continent a little bit more. So you see a lot of like Roman military presence, especially by the time. So that all starts by, I think around like 210. I want to say 210, but that's probably wrong. So don't accept that like immediate date. But it's this 3rd century crisis that basically has Rome take a bunch of its soldiers and military personnel back to the continent to try to defend against. There's I guess some stuff going on. People are fighting or whatever, and ultimately, like, we kind of see throughout the process of this a looser and looser grasp Imperial Rome has on the Isle, the British Isle or or Britain or whatever. So yeah, after Rome leaves, because Rome is really like officially out of Britain, I'd say by like about 400 AD. It seems like where the British were actually struggling against barbarian invasions, which I believe the Romans were too at the time. They asked Rome for military assistance, and Rome was like, "Hey, look, we can't. There's nothing for you. We got our own stuff to do. We got our own people to fight." And this kind of like completely closes, this completely cuts Britain off from this like Roman Empire, really leaving it to govern by itself. From this point on, really the main thing that continues to kind of like exist in continuity for like Britain and like between Britain and Rome are the fact that like the Romans have built like a bunch of roads connecting a number of settlements and everything like that, as well as the religious principles of Christianity, which really took hold, it looks like, in Britain, which will go on to kind of cement a bunch of sort of social relationships and inform how the continent kind of, well, not the continent, Britain kind of continues to rule itself. Oh, okay, here we found it. The three rivers that connect at the point of the Castle Cardiff are the Taff, the Ely, and the Rhymney. I may be saying all of this wrong, but it happens. So anyway, 400 AD, comes and goes. The Romans are gone now. This is a really interesting time of the history to try to research because it's a lot more difficult to find to a certain extent. I used the website, the official Cardiff Castle website, to kind of like begin figuring out what I wanted to look at for the video, and you'll notice if you go to this original the Cardiff Castle website, this block of history is almost like entirely left out of the discussion there, which is weird because there's literally like a nearly 600 period of time that the official Cardiff Castle website just decides to ignore. It's likely that upon the Romans leaving this area, like southern Wales, somewhere before 400 AD, that the area was kind of ruled by a combination of like Romano-British aristocrats and Welsh leaders that would have likely come from Irish or like Scottish settlers. So what ends up happening is Wales isn't like singularly defined in this aspect of history, right? It's a series of kingdoms, that have, varying reaches. At no point, however, what we consider like to be like a larger Wales does that exist. There are a bunch of different kind of tribes that all claim different places. So the next time we really pick up with a sort of like official leadership is when the Normans really start to invade this Welsh land and this Welsh occupied land, these various kingdoms. So a lot of this history is like a little bit more difficult to find because it's sort of not the official story for a bunch of people, right? Like this 600 years of history is not necessarily like super well documented or has like that kind of continuity of historical records, I guess. I'm not really sure how these kingdoms kept documentation or if they did. But from what we know, the first powerful Welsh king, and I'm going to screw this name up, was Maglwyn. Gwynedd. Maglwyn Gwynedd. And it was the former land of the Solers actually that became the foundation of the Kingdom of Gwent. So I have a map of Gwent, but that was, from what I understand, the first significant time under this powerful Welsh Queen Maegwyn Gwent that several kingdoms were kind of able to form like a larger area. In the area of Gwent would continue to kind of exist in the southeastern sort of corner of Wales, right next to the kingdom that would come to be known as Glamorgan by the Normans. That would be the land that they see as themselves kind of conquer. There's a little bit of argument within a bunch of the research that I did. Some called this Glamorgan. The Welsh probably would have referred to it as Morganwig. And there are a whole bunch of kind of like separations. The two sort of like the handful of main Welsh kingdoms I think we're gonna really kind of like focus on for this part are Gwent, Morganwig, and I don't know how to say this. I'm probably gonna really screw this up, but let's see. It's right here. Deheubarth. Deheubarth. Again, writing all this on the screen, and I'm probably saying it wrong next time. I'll do better. I'll try to do better. But so yeah, these are all kind of in the same, general southern Wales. But they're all different kingdoms. They're all ruled by different people. So I'm not gonna. I wasn't really able to accurately get much of this like 600-year period of time. So I'm gonna basically kind of pick up right where like the Normans come in. That being said, there is a little bit more context with this like Welsh. This old Welsh leadership that seems to be kind of forgotten, at least by a number of sources. I'm sure I can find it somewhere, but I'm just trying to get these videos out weekly, so for the time being, we're just going to leave it a little bit vague, because I'm not going to pretend to know everything about it. But basically, by the time that the Normans kind of begin to try and do this conquest that the William the Conqueror is really determined to do, there are a number of like kind of more powerful Welsh kings with more established Welsh kingdoms and lands and everything like that. So there's actually let's see, it's because this whole period is also like really interesting in the sense like this is how this next part is basically how the Normans secure Cardiff Castle, and there are a couple of players that I think are important here. The first thing that we need to kind of establish is that this kingdom of Morganwig was right next to Gwent, from what I really understand. And again, the English, it seems like, referred to the kingdoms of Gwent, Morganwig, and Deheubarth as Morganwig. And in respect to that, I think they saw the leadership of this area primarily being held by a Welsh king known as Rhys ap Tudor at this time. Right now, we're really zooming in on the sort of like area around 1093. We're going to say that this what we're focusing on is anywhere between 1081 and 1093 for the kind of siege of the Castle Cardiff, because it's at this time, like I said, we're dealing with the kingdoms of Gwent, Morganwig, and Deheubarth. And at this time, it's Easton ap Grugant. Again, like, hopefully I'm saying this right. He was the ruler of Broghamorgan, or Morganwig, And this was essentially like sort of the southernmost point of this tip of Wales. Like I said, it was that same, three river intersection. And what we know is that essentially um, William the Conqueror clearly felt he had some claim to the land of Wales, and there's actually an interesting relationship between William the Conqueror and the Welsh king of Deheubarth, Rhys ap Tudor, where Rhys is, if I'm understanding this correctly, he actually paid King William 40 euros a year for the kingdom of Deheubarth, making him actually a vassal state of the Norman king. Um, and basically, it seems that it's around the William's death. The William the Conqueror dies in 1087, and that's when a bunch of I believe they're called marcher lords at the time, but this title might be reserved for a little bit later. But basically there are a bunch of kind of like lords and barons that exist on the borders of Wales that after the death of William the Conqueror really begin to start trying to sort of conquer Wales even more than they were before. So, and part of that is probably because of this kind of like vassal relationship between a number of these kingdoms and William the Conqueror. But that being said, Rhys ap Tudor is not the actual king of the Cardiff location at the time. It was likely Easton ap Grugant, and from what we know, he had a number of family members. He had sons. I think he had brothers. And as far as we're aware, his progeny would be known to live in mountain regions that are kind of beyond Wales and beyond the Vale. So from what we know, if the reports of these family members are true, living elsewhere, it's likely that from these mountain regions, are beyond Wales. It's possible that sometime because there are stories of William the Conqueror actually returning from a like really productive conquest from St. David's in 1081, where he starts the construction of the Cardiff Keep and the Cardiff Castle on these old Roman war fortifications, these old Roman military installations on these hills at Cardiff. What you should take away from a bunch of this sort of like rambling is that the actual capture of the Cardiff Castle from the Welsh king of the time is really kind of contested, at least within the research that I did. It seems like there are kind of like a number of actors at play. They're all kind of like vaguely involved. And again, I'm not a historian, so please take it easy on me. If you do know more about this era of history, I would love to know specifically if you know what happens, but from the looks of it, basically there's Robert Fitzhamon, who is working with William the Conqueror at the time to kind of keep conquering southern Wales. He is the one who ends up taking Cardiff from Easton ap Grugant, who at the time was living at Cardiff, right? He was a Welsh lord, and from what I was able to gather, he was kind of basically threatened by Robert Fitzhamon with a show of force, and likely peacefully somewhat agreed to give Robert Fitzhamon the keep And then Easton ap Gurgant was likely exiled as a result of all of that. So that's how, as far as I'm aware, and again, it's just me. So if you have any more information or sources that would be valuable, I'm part of doing this is just like I want to learn more about history. So, I'm gonna be wrong from time to time, probably more than from time to time. And if you know anything, just help me out. You can scream at me, but it's not gonna help. Um, yeah. So as far as we're aware, this sort of show of force made by Robert Fitzhamon, friend of William the Conqueror, is enough to get Easton ap Gurgant away from Cardiff. His family kind of gets exiled, and that's how Robert Fitzhamon claims the Cardiff Castle. This goes forward because that was like, probably earlier than 1093, which is at least when I have that the Fitzhamon was able to actually fully depose and defeat Rhys ap Tudor, who is that powerful Welsh king of Deheubarth. So that is when he actually gets declared Lord of Glamorgan, which again is kind of, at least from my research, like a simplified way of referring to these like series of Welsh kingdoms. So it's likely that he had captured the Cardiff Castle before he was made into the Lord of Glamorgan. And that the 1093 mark might be when he actually is declared a Marcher Lord. The Marcher Lord is, I was kind of talking about them earlier. They're a series of lords and barons along the border of Wales that the king essentially gives power of constructing keeps and renovating keeps, which is a right that was traditionally really only held by the king. So these Marcher Lords, they're really a title that lets you have a little bit of power that normal barons or lords who are more subservient to the king don't have. And you get to kind of operate outside of the rules of England because you're not technically a lord of England, but of the March instead. These Marcher Lords are really only, from what I read, people that the king trusts. And later in the history, we'll kind of, there will be a bunch of interesting points where some of the people who live at the Cardiff Castle are actually very kind of antagonistic to the king's singular authority in Britain, but that's really for later. So Robert Fitzhamon is declared Lord of Glamorgan in 1093 after the defeat of Rhys ap Tudor, and I'm not actually completely certain necessarily on the territory that gets transferred to Robert Fitzhamon, but this marks the initial sort of lordship held over Cardiff Keep, and it's during this is the what I'm going to call the Norman period for the Cardiff Keep. This is the period where they will actually renovate the castle. They'll rebuild. So William the Conqueror, there are tales that the construction of the castle was either started by William the Conqueror or Robert Fitzhamon. The two kind of takes are it was either started by William the Conqueror in 1081 as he's kind of coming back from the conquest of St. David, or it's this construction is started in 1091 by Fitzhamon after he begins the invasion of 1090 that would result in him getting the lordship of Glamorgan. So that only marks the beginning. This is only the beginning of the Norman rule over the Cardiff Keep, and Robert Fitzhamon was declared Lord of Glamorgan, and he now has taken control of the land once occupied by Ibstin ap Gregant. Sorry, I'm so sorry. This is why my name is Dr. Idiot. Yeah, so that's how Robert Fitzhamon got the castle. That's how he defeated the Welsh king of Deheubarth. This would not be the end of Welsh resistance. By the way, there's a lot more going on with Wales and people resisting this Norman conquest. But for the time being, we're going to leave that right where it is. And so that's how it's during this probably initial conquest of Wales, of southern Wales, of these Welsh kings that we're going to go with that story. We're going to go with the story that Robert Fitzhamon decided to build more fortifications at Castle Cardiff to hopefully be better at fending off any Welsh nonsense that came his ways. And by the way, I don't really mean Welsh nonsense. I think the Welsh kings were very warranted in not just letting Robert Fitzhamon walk all over them, try to steal all their land, But nonetheless, that's what happened, and Robert Fitzhamon, it looks like, began constructing a wooden version of Cardiff Castle when he was beginning to kind of create, antagonize these Welsh kings more. Eventually, he was able to obviously capture the keep and take Glamorgan. So that's where this history begins to. We're gonna speed up a little bit. So he goes on and, dies at some point. He dies, in 1107. I believe that the castle is then transferred in succession to his daughter Mabel, who has a husband who does something. Oh, I think the son was like the bastard kid of Henry I. Don't quote me on that. But I'm trying to speed this part up a little bit because the next main thing I really want to talk about is the next renovation to the Cardiff Castle. So after Mabel and her bastard husband Robert live at the castle, I believe after that, I think it's transferred to their son Robert. I think it's another Robert. Don't quote me on this. Don't quote me on any of this. But the castle goes to Robert, who ends up fortifying it. This is why I wanted to get to it. He increases the fortifications. It's under, I believe, the second Robert the Council, Duke of Gloucester, Duke of Gloucester, Robert, Duke of Gloucester, the Consul. Some call him the Consul. He's the one who actually in the 12th century upgrades this wooden Motte and Bailey. We'll talk about Motte and Bailey's, I guess, at some point because I'm already so full up on crap we're talking about today. It's during the 12th century that the wooden keep gets upgraded to a stone keep, okay? At the end of the day, that's what's important. In the 12th century that happens, and it's because of a renewed Welsh threat as a result of the Great Revolt of 1136. So let's talk a little bit about what was happening. Obviously, from this history, we've gotten no shortage of examples of people trying to take things that belong to these Welsh kingdoms. I'm sure people could argue a bunch of ways about this, but that's the really main way that I'm gonna read it is that everyone was trying to take these Welsh kingdoms stuff, and I'm sure these Welsh kingdoms, I'm sure these kings were not great people, all right, but whatever. That's a lot more. That's a lot more political than we need to get into right now. Anyway, this is the story of the Great Revolt. So, we have it established at the beginning of the story. Um, we got all these people down at Cardiff Castle, and they really represent these like marcher lords, these people who, absent William the Conqueror, are starting to seriously endeavor to colonize, kingdoms like Deheubarth and Morganwig and Gwent. So you got a whole bunch of, Welsh aristocracy, royalty, and, warrior kings and queens who really aren't having it. This all, however, really comes to a head when King Henry dies in 1135, because he had a very complicated his death essentially initiated a succession crisis. His only legitimate son had died in 1120, and Henry wanted to nominate Henry didn't want to. He did nominate his daughter Matilda, Empress Matilda, they call her. Henry nominated Empress Matilda to succeed him, right? Much to the chagrin of his nephew Stephen of Blois. That's how I'm reading it. Who, along with his friend, his brother Henry, who was a bishop, Stephen of Blois and Henry, the bishop here, ended up seizing power from Matilda, who, Henry I wanted. And this created a period known as the Anarchy in Britain. And so this was a time period, from my understanding, where the English were not happy, the Welsh were not happy, the Scottish were not happy, and you had King Henry's nephew up there, just stealing his leadership. This creates a condition where, especially for, several Welsh tribes, that they decide that the chaos happening, around the power center in Britain is probably a good time to try to retake some of their land back. So you have a couple battles happen. The one that I heard, there's a battle of Leuchar, or the Battle of Gower. It's been referred to both ways. And there are a couple more battles that essentially, give the Welsh people some hope that they can start to take back their lands, right? And so one of these people is someone by the name of Princess Gwenllian, who was born in 1100 to the Prince of Gwynedd, right, and his wife. So she has 4 sisters, 3 brothers, 1 father. She has a mother too. Not to downplay that. I mentioned these 4 men because they'll play a pretty great role in the revolt that we're gonna end up talking about. She ends up, being born into royalty, and I think they're descendants of the great Irish king, God bless. So she ends up meeting, who is this guy? She ends up meeting the Prince of Deheubarth, okay, in 1113. So, and this is even more to the point. When Robert Fitzhamon, declared himself Lord of Glamorgan, or anybody declared him Lord of Glamorgan, obviously, despite the defeat of Rhys ap Tudor, there very much was still a center of power that this sort of like Welsh aristocracy has, right? Because otherwise, how would anybody still be the Prince of Deheubarth in 1113, or anybody be the sort of princess of frickin' Gwynedd at 1110 or 1100? Great. So just because Robert Fitzhammond apparently defeated all of these like Welsh people, that doesn't necessarily give him reign of all of the land, and there are still some very clear pockets of Welsh resistance in going into 1100 here. So it's during this period of chaos, it's during the anarchy, the English anarchy in 1135, that a bunch of Welsh kingdoms and chieftains decide that this is a good time to try to take back some of the land that's been stolen from them. And one of the people who ends up getting really beaten badly at the beginning of this conflict on the Norman side was, let's see, his name is Maurice de Londres of Kidwelly. He ends up getting, I think, pushed back to the castle of Kidwelly, and I'm not sure about his territory prior to that, but he ends up getting, mad and deciding that as he's sort of been defeated, he's going to continue to try to launch attacks into the heart of Deheubarth, which Gwenllian doesn't like. And by this point, it should be noted, Gwenllian was born at 1100. She was with her first child in 1116, and by 1132, she had 3 children. Apparently, she was occupying a sort of mountain fortress in the territory of Deheubarth. I'm not sure where her and her husband, the old prince of Deheubarth, were launching attacks against the French, against the English, and against the Normans, and then redistributing the wealth that they would get from these attacks to the Welsh kind of people around them. So they had a really good reputation. They were descendants of royalty. And so it's in 1136 that Gwenllian gets word of Maurice de Londres, who's in the castle of Kidwelly. He's going to try to attack some part of Deheubarth, right? As this is happening, her husband, the Prince of Deheubarth, is actually going to, I think it's Gwynedd. It's either Gwynedd or Gwent, to talk to Gwenllian's father about, this possibility of throwing the Normans out of their land once and for all. A number of Welsh leadership saw this as a key time and a really perfect opportunity to try to take back a bunch of the power and land that they've lost from the Marcher Lords, because there's so much chaos surrounding the crown, and no one's really happy with it right now. So as he's away, she decides that she's going to try to lead an ambush against Maurice de Londres. However, one of her chieftains ends up backstabbing her. He tells the Lord of Kidwelly that she's going to try to ambush him, which means that this ambush does not go well. In the kind of attacking party is Gwenllian and 2 of her sons. One of them is killed. Gwenllian, I am so bad with this name. I am so sorry. Gwenllian gets beheaded, and her other son gets captured. So one son's dead, one son's captured. Gwenllian is beheaded, and it's this death of this princess that really really pisses off, her father, the Prince of Gwynedd, her 3 brothers, who are all Welsh royalty, and her husband, who is obviously the Prince of Deheubarth. And that's kind of what sparks the Great Revolt of 1136. From what I know, Robert actually, the Robert that we were talking about, the descendant of Robert Fitzhammond, actually, this is the reason why he ends up, upgrading the castle's defenses. It becomes a stone keep. I think he adds a couple of walls. I think it's the south and the west, if I'm correct. And this is all in order to defend against a possible Welsh attack from what is now an incredibly pissed off Welsh resistance, right? So that's the next like major kind of addition that's added to the Cardiff Castle. And following that, the next significant point that we should talk about is, and this is what's going to conclude this part one of the history, how the Cardiff Castle transferred hands from the Normans to the De Clares. So the Norman rule of the castle was really defined by that Fitzhamon line that started when William the Conqueror died, and they took all this sort of Welsh land. And the reason why I think I want to touch on the De Clares in just at the end of this is because the manner in which succession kind of ended up playing out is kind of complicated here. So I thought it would be fun because it's just a little bit of a relationship chicken or hot potato, I guess. It's like Succession hot potato. It goes from one person to the next So towards the end of his rule as the Lord of Glamorgan, the descendant of Robert Fitzhamon, I think had like a kid named William, and okay, no, let's see. Okay, so let's read this. Transfer this to the family is not Fitzhamon. Okay, so Fitzhamon had a daughter named Mabel. Mabel married Robert, who was a bastard son to King Henry I. And this is just a fun little tidbit, but during his lordship, he actually imprisoned the Duke of Normandy, who was Henry's brother, on behalf of his bastard father, and until the King of Normandy died in 1134. So that's just fun. That Robert ended up dying in 1147, where lordship was given to his son. His son William died in 1183. So this was all, that's sort of when we see, so Robert's rule would have been, during that sort of Great Revolt of 1136. It's not reported, as far as I'm aware, that William really did much with the castle. And he died in 1183. He had no male heirs, but he did have 3 daughters. So he had 3 daughters by the names of Mabel, Isabel, and Amicia. Mabel is the eldest daughter, and she was actually married to some guy with the last name Montfort, which is going to be significant when we talk about the Baron Wars, which is a whole nother thing, and a large part of why this video is going to be multiple parts. Thank you. Thank you, the Montforts. But anyway, Mabel dies childless. So once she dies childless, succession and inheritance is transferred to Isabel, Isabel was the youngest child. She married somebody by the name of Prince John, who was made King John upon this marriage. He immediately divorced Isabel to marry Isabella, a different heiress. And so that I feel like that like almost took Castle Cardiff out of the Norman kind of succession for a second, but Isabel actually dies in 1217, and that causes ownership to be passed to her middle sibling Amicia. So I guess for at least, this Norman, and especially the family coming up, the De Clares, for the Normans and the De Clares, it's a good thing Isabel died, right? Because otherwise inheritance would not have transferred over to Amicia, who had recently, I think, married Robert De Clare, and she had a son with him called Gilbert De Clare. So Robert actually ends up dying 6 weeks after Isabel died. So he wasn't really alive to receive any kind of like formal lordship or ownership of the keep. But his son was here, and Gilbert, his son, is the one who ends up getting inheritance over the castle. And that's when the Cardiff keep switches hands from the Normans to the Declares. So yeah, here let's try to big bullet point some of this history as a conclusion, right? So this is the Cardiff Castle that we're dealing with. It's located in the south of Wales. That was first, kind of colonized by the Romans in 400 AD as they were trying to complete this conquest of the local Silures. Great. The Romans stay, and they end up subduing the Silures by about 75 AD. They stay until about 400 AD, and then it's a combination of the 3rd century crisis and the sacking of Rome that ends up taking away a bunch of the Roman structure and leadership from the society at this time. And at this time, it's likely that a bunch of Irish and Scottish immigrants, as well as Romano and British aristocrats, kind of begin forming smaller kingdoms in Wales. One of those kingdoms ends up being Gwent, which is led by one of the earliest powerful Welsh kings, and there are a bunch of sort of there's so many there's hundreds of years between when the Romans leave and the Normans try to reestablish control over Wales. By this time, the area that we're dealing with, where Cardiff Castle is located, is Morganwig, according to, the sort of Welsh that live there. The British end up referring to it as Glamorgan, and it's during the conquests of William the Conqueror that, Norman power starts to get established in South Wales, and it's likely that leadership switched from the Welsh king Easton ap Gurgant to Robert Fitzhamond, who was one of William's, little king cronies. This guy, Robert Fitzhamond, would go on to defeat Rhys ap Tudor and ultimately get declared Lord of Glamorgan, where there would continue to be Welsh resistance to Norman rule. So the Cardiff Keep was originally sort of established likely around 1093 as a wooden Motte and Bailey structure to defend against possible Welsh invasion, and as well as to be kind of like a base of operations as Robert Fitzhamond continues to wage war against Rhys ap Tudor. From this point on, Robert Fitzhamond would go away. He would get the lordship of Glamorgan. He would die fighting the French for Henry I, as well as a result of injuries sustained while fighting the French. The next major update to the castle would be with his grandson in the 12th century as a result of the anarchy and the Great Revolt. And then not much would really happen relative to the castle until William died in 1183, leaving his inheritance to be contested by his 3 daughters. This issue of this contest of succession is ultimately claimed by his middle daughter his middle daughter Amicia's son, Gilbert de Clare. And that's how Cardiff Castle ends up going from a Roman military settlement to under the lordship of the de Clares. And we'll be back next time with another drawing of the Cardiff Castle from a different angle, and we'll be talking more about the lordship of the de Clares. Thank you for watching. I'm gonna make more of these. I really like history. I know there's probably a lot that I got wrong. This, like I said, is really my first endeavor into English history, Welsh history, and anything like it. So yeah, if you have any notes or anything, any corrections, definitely let me know. I'm gonna link all the sources that I used for this. And yeah, if you're somebody who really likes history, I'm gonna keep trying to make more of these. I just think it's really cool, the idea that you could, get to learn more as you're kind of like making pictures of stuff. This has been a really interesting first kind of look into the history, and it's super involved work, the history of England. There's way more civil wars than I expected. As an American, I really we only have the one civil war. I feel like you guys are drowning in civil wars over there. You guys gotta relax. But yeah, if you have any notes, let me know. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. And I'm probably gonna end up figuring out, a different castle to cover by the end of my research into the Cardiff Castle, because I'm guessing there's also gonna be a part 2 and a part 3 for this, just with how involved all this history is. And if you want me to cover anything specific, just let me know in the comments, and I'll keep an eye out for anything really interesting. Right now I'm trying to keep this kind of series relative to just like castles and all that stuff, and this sort of like I'm gonna start with the Welsh, I think, like the Welsh invasion, and I just find this really interesting. But yeah, so we're probably gonna keep covering Welsh history. We're definitely gonna cover more of the Cardiff Castle next time. Make sure to make sure to subscribe if you had a fun time watching this, because I'm gonna keep making more. If you want to support the channel, like I said, like and subscribe. And yeah, this has been fun. It's been a lot of research. Gonna try to do this once a week. All right. Have a good day. Have a good day, everybody. Goodbye.